It's about making personal choices. There is such a movement, I think, around things that are made in Africa. I think we're all proud when we see them, especially when they're of great quality. We have that pride about the continent, and rightly so. But not a lot of people make the leap between being proud of made in Africa and actually consume made in Africa, especially for the middle class, upper class, people who have the means to purchase things from outside of the continent. There's still a tendency to do so. There's still an association that which comes from outside the continent is superior in quality. And so I challenge that. And I think people just need to make different personal choices about their consumption pattern.
Another week, another episode. We get to enjoy the gems of knowledge that are dropped here every week by every single individual that's been a part of this podcast episodes. This is the AOU podcast, Entrepreneurial Leadership in Africa. Today's guest is a woman in power, a boss lady in power, and her name is Elizabeth, and she's a development professional, leader, and lifter of people. She says joy is her superpower. She has 20 years of experience working in Africa, born and raised in Cameroon, educated in the US. She traveled the world extensively and worked in more than half of African countries, and she's gained a considerable understanding of the African continent and has a unique perspective on opportunities it presents, and hence her being perfect for this episode. So in her current role as CEO of Junior Achievement Africa, she works with young people across Africa in shaping their futures and the future of the continent. And she's very committed to development, especially for women and youth in Africa, where she believes that three things: choices, voices, and opportunities are key to changing the trajectory of development of the continent. So I'd just like to give a warm welcome to Elizabeth, and maybe she can further introduce herself. But let's get into the episode for today. So please tell us more about yourself and how you got to know about AOU.
So I was born and raised in Cameroon.
Okay.
Moved to the U.S. when I was 16 years old. I moved to the U.S. for university, partly because my dad was teaching there at the time. So it was sort of, the best decision my parents made for me. It wasn't really my decision. And then I went to school in the U.S. I did my undergrad in international relations with a minor in African studies, and then I went on to do my master's degree in African studies at Yale University in Connecticut.
Okay.
And then after that, I was very fortunate to start working in Africa. By then, after a master's in African studies, my love for Africa, my interest in Africa had just blossomed to this, incredible curiosity. As part of my undergrad program, I had to do an African language, incidentally studying African languages in the U.S.
Right.
And I chose Swahili. And so I ended up, after graduate school, doing a fellowship in Zanzibar for about 3 months in Swahili. So that was one of the best experiences of my life, just, experiencing a different culture. And that was my first foray into Africa. Outside of my own country, and the starting of my realization that we are alike in so many ways and very different in so many ways. And then after that, I was very fortunate to just start working. I've worked in the NGO sector now for 20 years at different organizations, and now I work at Junior Achievement in Ghana.
Wow. Okay. So you have an interesting story. You were born and raised in Cameroon, educated and worked in the U.S., and then returned to Africa. What drove all these key decisions you made, and why come back to Africa?
As I said earlier, the decision to move to the U.S. was not my own. That was my parents' decision.
Right.
But in hindsight, I think it was a good one, and I'm very fortunate to have had, the education that I've had. But the decision to come back to Africa was definitely mine. Moving to the U.S. really did. I think maybe because it was abrupt.
Okay.
Really elevated my interest in Africa. And my curiosity around the continent. And also, I think, to give it some context, my dad was a professor of history, particularly African history.
Okay.
So that was sort of our thing that we bonded over, he and I. So I think, I had those foundations and I just sort of built on it. And by the time I finished grad school, I knew I wanted to work in nonprofits and I knew I wanted to maintain that connection to Africa.
Yeah.
So my first job, I was with an organization called Heifer International for 15 years.
Okay.
I started working there as an admin assistant, and by the time I left, I was the vice president for Africa programs. So I was constantly traveling to Africa from Little Rock, Arkansas, of all places, which is, in the middle of the U.S. It was long trips almost every month. I was, in all the 12 countries that I had in my portfolio at the time.
Yeah. You couldn't
And
tell
it
me
was
that that wasn't
daunting
fun
and
at all.
exhausting. Do what?
You couldn't tell me that that wasn't fun at all.
It was, it was so much fun until I had kids, and then it became a lot of work.
Right.
Yeah, traveling, breastfeeding, the whole bit was just, it got to me finally, and that was ultimately, I think, why I quit that job. I just couldn't sustain that level of energy. But it was a great job, and it allowed me to really see all different parts of the continent, meet all kinds of people. And
Yeah.
ultimately, by the time as I said, just couldn't sustain it anymore, it was very clear that the next step for me, instead of having my soul reside in Africa and having my body reside in the US, I wanted both things to be in the same place. And
Yeah.
so I made the decision to move back to Africa, and really thought very carefully about where I wanted to live. And Ghana was a country in all my travels at the time that I had just
Yeah.
fallen so much in love with and knew I wanted to live here. So when I quit my job, actually, I had a very narrow search. I was just looking to move to Ghana.
Yeah.
And as fate would have it, I was very fortunate to get this job at Junior Achievement and have been here for almost 5 years.
Wow, it excites me a lot when I hear people speak so passionately about wanting to come back home and feeling like, their calling is where home is, or, just generally in Africa, and just, so to say, getting in touch with their roots, as a lot of people like to say.
Yeah. Yeah, for me it's always, it's always been a very strong connection, and then it gets to a point, people ask me all the time about the decision to come back and how they would know and how they make that decision, and I just say to them, when the time comes, you will not be able to hear or think about anything else until you do it, and you will know, because it will consume all of your energy.
Exactly,
A
yeah.
connection with home is very strong. We were just talking about, even a connection like with food. you know, all of the things that draw us to home are so deep in who we are, and you
Yeah,
can't resist them when they start hearkening to you.
right. Okay, so Junior Achievement for over 100 years has delivered hands on experiential learning in financial literacy, work readiness, and entrepreneurship in over 100 countries. Why do young Africans need this, and how do you achieve this mission on the continent?
Um, it's for me. It was a really, when I was looking at taking this job, I was really drawn by the mission, and the breadth of need.
Right.
I knew when I wanted to come back to the continent. One of the things that, having my conversations with God about what am I going to do next, I said, I'd really like to work with youth. Because I wanted to
Yeah.
do something that was future looking. And in my view of what the future of this continent youth are just central to the dialogue, the change making, all of the different elements of it. So coming back and having the opportunity to lead an organization that focused on that was attentive to the different and to the changing environment and circumstances of young people on this continent. We're just finishing a survey with an
Right.
organization, one of the big global consulting firms, and one of the first results that we've gotten of it, we interviewed almost 3,000 young people around the continent, is just the passion for entrepreneurship. It was something like 73% of young people see their futures as being entrepreneurs as opposed to being employed, for something else. And that's a significant shift from, my parents' generation not so long ago, where, they all worked for government,
Yeah.
and then the generation after that where, everybody
Yeah.
aspired to work for a large multinational company. And now to be in a time when young people want to work for themselves, and we're seeing this, the environment, the ecosystem of creativity, of business, of entrepreneurship, of innovation on this continent is
Right.
just tremendous. And I really wanted to be a part of that. So it's been a great honor to be a part of JA, and just to watch the people, not just from a far perspective, but young people that I've gotten to know personally, that I've gotten to mentor personally. Being a part of their journey and their story has just been great for
Right.
me.
One question that I've always asked entrepreneurs when they come onto this podcast is, how were you able to share your vision and mission and have people care about it as well enough to support your dreams?
That's a great one. For me, storytelling is one of the most powerful tools that we have on this continent. And I think as Africans, this is a bit cliche, but I really
Yes, and
do
I believe
think
Africans, we're good at
we're
it.
really good at it. If you've never had an authentic African experience of sitting under a
Yeah.
tree, listen to an old man talk about, something that happened, it's riveting. So I think we have that innate capacity, and I know I definitely I'm such a
Yes.
storyteller. It's like start a conversation with me, and you'll hear everything there is to
Right.
say. But I do think it's very, very important, especially for entrepreneurship, because for so long, the brand or the narrative of entrepreneurship on this continent was something that's very foreign. And even today, I still see it. A lot of young people, you ask them who they think of as entrepreneur. The ones that I see very often are likely to be like Richard
Yeah.
Branson, Mark Zuckerberg. You wouldn't often hear, you know, uh, um, an African entrepreneur, Chris Kirubi, Aliko Dangote, Strive Masiwa. A lot of them don't know that. And I think it's partly because our African entrepreneurs
Yeah.
aren't telling their story, at least not as loudly as the other, entrepreneurs in other parts of the world are. And I think so that storytelling is very important. But I also, on the flip side, tell young people, knowing how to tell your story, knowing how to share a vision with people is important. But it isn't everything because, one of the
Yeah.
sort of anecdotes or metaphors that I say is like building a house of your dreams, or building of your dreams. Some people will see the blueprint on paper and they'll understand your vision, and others will look at it and say, I don't get it. Some
Yeah.
people, you'll see the scaled down model of the house, of the building, and some people will get it and others won't. Some people will see the prototype, all of these things, and even some people will see the building after it's been built and still not get it. So it's important to tell your story, it's
Yeah.
important to share the vision, but know that some people won't always get it, and you have to be able to move toward that vision on your own and with the partners and supporters that you have. And some of the most critical people in your life won't get it. I mean, we talk about, parents. Parents are such a big part of this entrepreneurship conversation, and they don't always get it.
All right. So speaking of storytelling, comprehension, and communication, Junior Achievement Africa has presence in 15 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and has reached more than 250,000 youth each working year in 1,420 schools. Are there any success stories across Africa you can share as a result of this mentorship?
Gosh, there's so many success stories. I think success stories are sort of what I live.
Yeah.
And there's stories, I think a lot of them are also success stories in the making.
Right.
Because we often count success by, the seeds that have sprouted or by the harvest. And success sometimes is the seeds that are being planted, and that's what I believe. It doesn't, for a lot of the young people we're working with, some of them are still in primary school. So we haven't yet begun to see what they're capable of or what they're going to do. But when you can see that there's a mindset change, I've been in many classrooms all around this continent. When you can see the aha moment in the eyes of a child, you can just
Right.
think, it's coming. Just stand back, world, and watch what this child is going to do. But in terms of the ones that I know and I'm close to, so many success stories. Just even I was thinking this morning, who I want to talk about. Just in the ALU, ALA family,
Right.
we have so many of our alumni who have gone on to these amazing institutions. I think of John Ewutu, who I believe is on your Mauritius campus,
Right.
who is one of our alumni, a close friend of mine, personal mentee, just an amazing young man who started a company at such a young age and, is just doing really great things in the world, is winning awards left and right. I've gotten to see him speak on an international stage. He was the young person who was selected to speak on behalf of Africa at our centennial in Boston last year.
Right.
Really just tremendous to see everything he's doing. And I just kind of watch them like a hawk, just, they're like my babies. I'm like, oh, wow, look at you go. And another student, ALA student, Farai Munjoma from
Yeah, he's
Zimbabwe,
also at
also
the
a
AOU
JA
campus.
alumnus. He is amazing. I mean, I absolutely adore Farai. He's also created a company just doing tremendous things.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of them. Those are just two examples out of thousands across this continent. I think that's why Junior Achievement's work is so important, is it's really about changing the mindsets of people. And then once they have their mindset changed, giving them the tools to be able to make change happen in their lives for themselves, for their families, for
Right.
their communities. And I think that that's how we change a country. In many ways, we're still a continent of nation building, of nation builders. And I really
Yeah.
believe that change in the reality of our continent, in the reputation of our continent, is going to happen because of young people like these.
Right. So you published an article on LinkedIn titled "Does Your Soap Really Need to Come from Europe? Why Made in Africa is Not Enough." You noted that made in Africa is necessary but not sufficient for success. Ultimate success must be measured in terms of consumption in Africa by Africans. And then you finally
That's
concluded by
true.
saying, "Let us consume African." So how can we achieve
Yeah.
this?
Ooh. I think, it's about making personal choices.
Right.
There is such a movement, I think, around things that are made in Africa. I think we're all proud when we see them, especially when they're of great quality. We have that pride about the continent, and rightly so. But not a lot of people make the leap between being proud of Made in Africa and actually consume Made in Africa. And I think,
Right.
especially for the middle class, upper class, people who have the means to purchase things from outside of the continent,
Yeah.
there's still a tendency to do so. There's still an association that which comes from outside the continent is superior in quality. And so I challenge that. And I think people just need to make different personal choices about their consumption pattern.
Right.
There's a report that comes out every year around brand loyalty. And very seldom on that report do you see African brands as top brands that we ourselves are loyal to. And I just think that that's a missed opportunity. We're one of the biggest demographic, most populated populations in the world. We should be able to buy from ourselves. Looking at this whole conversation that's happening right now about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think
Yeah.
it's something like 17% of trade that's happening within Africa compared to something in the 30s and certainly higher in Europe. So I just think it's very missed opportunity, and especially for young people on the continent who are starting businesses, who are starting enterprises, who need capital to start and run those businesses, but more than
Yeah.
that, they need customers
Right.
to buy their products, to buy their services. And I think that those of us who are fortunate to have the means to be able to do so should do so. We should make different choices. We should not just appreciate things that are made in Africa by looking at them and being proud in our hearts and smiling in our faces. We should put our money where our mouth is.
Right. Support doesn't hurt.
Absolutely.
All right. So speaking of challenges that we face with consuming African products by Africans for Africans, you've traveled to 27 out of the 54 countries. I really wish I was you. What common trends or challenges are our entrepreneurs still facing, and how has Junior Achievement Africa and its partners helped to address this?
Um, I think, some of the main challenges, probably three things come to mind for me.
Right.
I think the biggest one is for young people, the biggest challenge is having their ideas validated. And
Okay.
that's validated by their peers, validated by their parents, just even, the idea of entrepreneurship. There's still a generational gap between parents and their kids who want to pursue entrepreneurship. Parents need to be more supportive of their children wanting to pursue that as a career option. That
Yeah.
validation is very important. I think anybody who has started a business or started anything really in this world, you need people around you who encourage you. You
Right.
need people who tell you that your idea is not crazy. It's not crazy. It's very, very important. So I think that personal network Interaction and validation is very important. Parental support is very important. Our parents, no matter how old we are still some of the most important stakeholders in my life. I'm in my mid 40s and I still call my mother for every big decision, and I don't think that that ever goes away.
Yeah.
So for something as big as entrepreneurship, I think it's important for parents to be supportive of that as a career pathway for their kids. And then I also think the third thing is the ecosystem, the sort of policy and political, socioeconomic ecosystem within which we exist. And we know the stories of challenges in Africa. We know that there's, barriers to access for so many things that entrepreneurs need to be
Yeah.
successful, whether it's capital, whether, financing, all of it.
Right.
Even, things like laws that allow somebody below the age of 18 to be able to open a bank account, that can
Yeah.
be a barrier for a young person. If you're 16 and you're wanting to start a business and you can't open a bank account, that's a significant barrier, because you can't then take a loan, you can't do all these things. So I think those are some of the main challenges that exist for young people. But, when you look at them, they're so easily overcomable.
Yeah.
I just think we need to be intentional about, making change happen to create a more healthy ecosystem for young people, young entrepreneurs to thrive in.
All right. So, obviously, COVID-19, the pandemic, has really disrupted the normal way of living and working. And, our hearts go out to those
Absolutely.
who are at the front line of, this whole pandemic. But how has JA adapted to these changes? And what is your advice to our budding entrepreneurs to adapt as well?
Yes, COVID-19 has been a great disruptor. It's very interesting for me to watch, sort of the conversations around the disruption, around the effects and the impacts of the virus, and a lot of I think we've all read the negatives of it. People are losing their lives, people are losing their livelihoods, and so on and so forth, and it's really sad.
Yeah.
But interestingly, as with all, big sort of tragedies, I think as this one is, there's always the flip side, right? There are opportunities to be gained. And I think for us, one of the things that came out at JA is, I think historically we've largely been a very sort of paper-based organization. Our programs, we printed on paper, and delivered them, manually in person and so on and so forth. And that limited us because there's a great need on the continent.
Yeah.
And we weren't meeting that need in the orders that we needed to. So this is forcing us to make the shift to digital. We knew that we needed to make it. We had started sort of tiptoeing in that direction, but COVID-19 has forced us to run in that direction. And I think the same is true for so many organizations, whether they be nonprofits or private, or even government. How do we deliver services to people in mass without needing other people to be mobilized to be able to do that? These are questions I think that we're all being faced with. But I also think the other opportunities that are emerging, especially for Africa, for young entrepreneurs in Africa, is that, because of the disruption that happened in the supply chains of so many of our goods and services,
Yeah.
we really had to jump in and fill our own gaps, I think, in a way that in sort of normal times we would have been turning to the outside to provide those things. I was just reading this morning about two young innovators in South Africa who have come up with a test for COVID-19. Very young people. I mean, I looked at their faces and I thought, my gosh, they're still in their 20s. Come up with a test for COVID-19 that, can gives you results in an hour. I just think that's significant,
Yeah.
And talk about African solutions to African problems. Senegal has come up with, is testing large numbers of people, has a test that costs $1, is printing respirators, is that what they're called? Respirators, with 3D printers
Yeah.
that cost something like $600 or $60 as opposed to one that would have come from abroad costing $16,000. So I think, these are the opportunities for us. These times are forcing us to say, listen, within this continent, we have what it takes to transcend our problems, to reverse the dangerous or negative trends that we've had as a continent. We need to dig deep and find those solutions for ourselves. These are sort of desperate times in many ways, and the desperate measures, if we can find them and make them persist beyond the pandemic, beyond the crisis, I think we'll be heading in a different direction as a continent.
Thank you so much for that. True to the people that we have on this podcast, especially women leaders, I feel like you're an embodiment of, boss ladies and women in power. You're a
Oh,
leader, a
thank you.
lifter of people, and indeed, joy is your superpower. On top of storytelling and,
Yes.
traveling, Junior Achievement has indeed lifted the hearts, goals, and ambitions of young students and entrepreneurs on the continent. So, any ideas of what the next journey is after Junior Achievement?
For me,
Yeah,
yes. So I am leaving Junior Achievement in June, which, is sad thing for me. Happy in some ways because I go
yeah,
on to find out what's next for me, but sad because it's an organization I've poured so much of myself into for
right,
almost 5 years and loved very much. And part of my anxiety about what's next for me is, am I going to lose my connection to the continent? Am I going to lose my connection to young people?
okay,
So as I'm, praying and talking to God and doing all the things that I do when I'm in the change process,
right,
putting out there the things that I would like. I don't know where I'm going next. I honestly don't. I haven't made any plans. I tend to, this is sort of my MO when I leave a job is, to give myself a good space
yeah,
to recollect, regroup, recover from all the travel, and just really find peace and quiet to be able to see what the next thing should be. So I don't know what it is, but I know what I'd like it to be is, and one of the key things for me is always making sure that no matter where I end up in the world, I still have a very strong connection to the continent.
right. True to the
So
topic
we'll
of
see.
this, true to the topic of this podcast episode, I believe that you've talked a lot about soft skills and being able to build a support system that can guide you through your journey throughout, and being able to be centered, because you've talked a lot about your spirituality, or your spiritual journey rather,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
just being grounded and sort of know where you're going, and even though you don't, there's always something that's able to guide you, or someone that's able to guide you throughout the process. And I really appreciate the little gems that you dropped here. I mean, they have a really big impact, and I do hope that they have the same impact on
Thank
the
you.
listeners as well.
Thank you so much. It's really my pleasure and my honor. I have very accidentally developed somewhat of a voice on this continent.
Right.
And I don't take that lightly. I feel the great responsibility for what I say and how I behave and all of the things. And if my journey and my thoughts, anything about me can teach somebody else, then I'm very honored by that.
All right, then. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Savannah. It was a pleasure to talk to
All
you.
right, then. Thanks.